Let's turn now to Roger Mosey, who is a former editor of the Today programme, former editorial director of the BBC News. Roger, thanks so much for joining us this morning. The government certainly won't welcome this war of words between the Trump administration and the BBC. Obviously, BBC won't either. Do you think that, how do you think that they will be thinking about this in New Broadcasting House?
Well, the overall story here is that there's this 19-page dossier produced by a former editorial advisor to the BBC. And my own assessment is there's some things that are right in it and quite a lot that's wrong in it. Unfortunately for the BBC, the single most damaging thing is this question about the editing of the Trump speech. And I've been talking to quite a lot of BBC people, as I'm sure you have, and I haven't found anybody in the past week who thinks that editing is defensible. And the weird thing here is that you don't need to edit Donald Trump to show what he was up to on January 6th in a way that's misleading. So I don't know how that edit happened, but it's not a good thing. And the stories this morning that the BBC is going to fess up to it feel like they're broadly right. I'm sure the BBC is going to have to do that.
Obviously, Nick Robinson, one of the most senior presenters of the BBC, of course, has said that although he agrees with you that the editing around the Panorama programme was not defensible, he is saying that this is being used as a war against the BBC by forces that want the BBC to not exist. Do you think that's correct?
Yeah, I think two things can be true. There is a determined political campaign against the BBC and against political funding. But unfortunately, in this case, the BBC seems to have got something wrong. And there is also a wider context in which, this isn't me saying it, but Tim Davie and Samir Shah and the previous chairman, Richard Sharp, have all said that the BBC has a liberal bias, and that's something that they are trying to tackle. And this, unfortunately, doesn't help in the overall big picture if it's found that they are distorting something that Donald Trump said. And I say distorting because the edit, when you look at it, is putting together two sentences which are different. And it means that the meaning of those sentences becomes different. However, of course, the BBC must have the right to make very highly critical programs about Donald Trump. That's part of impartiality too. You can call out people, and journalism should be able to do that.
Do you think it's right for the chairman to apologise, as it is said he's going to do?
Well, I don't know about apologise. I think what the BBC needs to do is account for all the aspects of the Prescott report, the dossier that was submitted and produced by the not entirely BBC-friendly Daily Telegraph. And they've got to account for it and explain. And there may be some things, there are a lot of things, I think, that Prescott gets wrong. And I don't think he really understands some of impartiality, including the idea that if you do a programme about Donald Trump, you must do an equally critical programme about Kamala Harris. As you know, Lewis, it's not the way that impartial journalism works. You can call out wrongdoing. However, what the BBC has to do, I think, is to go through the points made one by one almost and say where it's right, where it's wrong, and what they've done about it. And my understanding is that part of the frustration of BBC journalists and even some BBC executives in the past week is that the BBC hasn't made this case. And even if you think that the BBC whether it got it right or wrong on the substance, the handling this week and the accountability has been pretty weak. And I don't know about you, but I'm still not comfortable that all we know about the apology seems to be a briefing from somewhere or other to the Sunday Times and the Sunday Telegraph.
You'll have seen what the Mail on Sunday's front page is, which says Boris is blasted arrogant Nick Robinson for claiming bias row is an anti-BBC plot. This is escalating quite quickly, isn't it?
Well, I think sometimes in the BBC, stories can be a slightly slow burn. And I remember when you remember Jonathan Ross and Russell Brand and the terrible way that they behaved towards Andrew Sachs. When that story broke, I think people originally thought, well, this is a would-be comedy on Radio 2 and it doesn't matter very much. And it took 2 or 3 days for the BBC to get to the real seriousness of this. And I suspect something a bit similar happened here. So if you look at what happened within the BBC, BBC, Michael Prescott and other people have been making their claims about BBC bias or things are wrong in probably quite a long-running internal argument. And then it goes public and the BBC thinks, oh, it's the same old argument, there you go. Unfortunately, as I say for the BBC, there are elements of substance in it, not just Trump, but also I would say the position of BBC Arabic, where, again, I know BBC executives privately have been quite concerned about aspects of BBC Arabic. So there are elements here that the BBC has to account for, and it's no good saying, oh, it's a political campaign. You've got to be accountable.
Roger Mosey there, former head of news at the BBC.